Welcome to Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Today we're looking at Genesis 38. There are 30 verses. Beginning in verse 3, we see a little bit of a mix-up here. It's talking about Judah having babies with a lady named Sava, or Shua in the Masoretic. And it says here in verse 3, she called his name, she conceived and bore a son, and called his name Er. Okay, so this is implying that she's the one naming him. However, in the Masoretic, it says he. So Judah's naming him in the Masoretic. Again, in verse 4, we see she's naming the son again. She conceived and bore a son, called his name Onan or Onan. The Masoretic, it says that she names him. Right there explicitly, she called his name. Verse 5, we see again, she gives birth to a third son and called his name Shelah, or Salom in Greek. And she, meaning Sava, was in Hasbi when she bore them. It sounds like when she bore all three. And we see a difference here in verse 5 that, well, she called his name Shelah. Well, that's not a difference. But when he was at Kezib, so when Judah was at Kezib, when she bare him, so it sounds like she gave birth to Shelah in Kezib, and she gave birth to Shelah when Judah was in Kezib, and that's when she gave birth to him when Judah was in Kezib. But however, the Septuagint is saying that she was in Casbi when she bore all three, pretty much, and she named all three. And in the Masoretic, it implies that, well, not implies, it says explicitly that Judah named Er, but not the other two sons. So that's the introduction there. Verse 14, talking about Tamar, I believe. Let me just make sure this is talking about Tamar. Yeah, Tamar, there it is, verse 11. So this is the daughter-in-law of Judah, and he promised her that he would give her the younger son as soon as he grew up and was of age to be her husband, and she would be his wife. But he didn't do that. It says right there, he gave her not to him for a wife. So what did she do? She resorted to, in verse 14, it says she put on a veil. She took off the garments of her widowhood. She put on a veil and ornamented her face and sat by the gates of Anan. Okay, so that's what we see here. That's why I use the image of the two different women, one on the left who clearly has a face covering, and I'm interpreting that to mean a garment of widowhood is something that would not entice a man sexually. It would not attract any man's eyes for him to think lustful thoughts. That's what I think a garment of widowhood is. It's covering the woman's glory, their appeal, their sex appeal. They're just turning it down to zero, to the point where a man won't even look twice except to just notice a person, but not her as a woman and her sexuality. However, on the image on the right, as you will notice, let me just bring it up here. This is the image I used. As you can see, this is what I perceive a garment of widowhood to look like. I understand it's used in a different religious context, but I'm only submitting to you that a garment of widowhood is something that should not attract a man. So whether it's this or something more revealing remains to be seen. However, when she ornamented her face, I'm interpreting that to mean she was still covered. She still had a veil, because it says she put a veil on herself. So whether that's just a head covering or covering her lower half of her face, I am not sure. But the ornaments, I looked up, for example, Indian jewelry on the face. However, this is more of a Saudi Arabian style of ornamenting the face, and that is actually geographically and culturally closer to biblical fashion. And as you can see, this lady is dressed more revealing and more, there's more sexuality uh, with the enticement of the physical attraction. So, yeah, compared to her, she's definitely a prostitute, or appearing like one at least. And let's not mince our words. Let's not, let's call a spade a spade. Today, you can't compare the fashion of today to ancient times. If we're going to be very blunt about it, I'd say 80% of women dress like prostitutes today. Okay, I'm not mincing my words, I'm just saying it like it is. However, in times of old, it wasn't always that way. So, in biblical times, women dressed very conservatively. Obviously, they didn't try to attract men to entice them to thoughts of adultery and fornication. So I'm not saying every woman should dress like this. I'm saying this is a garment of widowhood. This is more of a garment of a whore, of a whoredom. And that's why this video is called The Whore. Tamar played the whore, essentially, she did. So that's all I have to say about that. I'm going to move on to reading about the chapter. I suppose we'd have to ask ourselves a question. So what would a woman ideally dress like, especially one keeping this faith? Let me just bring up some pictures. Hold on a minute. Okay, so here's Exhibit A. This is a lady wearing a loose dress. I wouldn't say it's very loose, but it's not very tight either. It's conservative. Really lends nothing to the imagination, except maybe some people would say it's too much ankle. I wouldn't personally say so, but anyway, she's just showing her foot a little bit. So I mean, depending on the person, that might be a little too much skin. Personally, I've been trying to stay away from looking at women's fashion, contemporary fashion, so that I look more at women dressed like this. And so when I see some lady wearing something that's, above the ankle or above the knee, it's shocking. It's really shocking. That's what happens when you surround yourself with a corrupt society, a corrupt culture. But when you surround yourself with images like this, I'm not saying every woman should wear a head covering like that, but at least a dress like this, at least garments like this. And, head coverings are their own fashion style as well. And you have many different ways women do that. For example, the Orthodox Jews have a way to do it. And I think it's very beautiful, the very different styles. So I'll just bring up one more picture. Okay, so here's an example. I just looked it up on image search. To be honest, I don't see a problem with what she's wearing. Some people might. Personally, I don't. It's not too tight. It's colorful. It's feminine. Her head covering is more modern, but it essentially does what it should do, which is cover the hair up and make her look modest. She is dressed modestly, in my opinion. It's not too tight. Maybe around the waist, it's a little tight, but it's not. It's not really sexually charged or anything like that. Yeah, she's showing ankle, but it's covered up. It's covered up, so there's no skin showing. So this is very conservative. I approve of this outfit personally. So I think that's how women should dress, in my opinion. And I think y'all would approve, in my opinion. You know what? It's to each their own, but I know what I feel and I look at this picture, and I definitely respect women dressed like this. So, okay, continuing on. Okay, all right. I said continuing on, but I'll just show you one more picture. I don't know if she's Orthodox, but this is a very good outfit. As you can see, it's loose. It's conservative. She is wearing something that looks like a man's jacket, but you know what? I'm gonna let that go. She is wearing a dress and a big scarf, and this hat I think does the job for a head covering. Uh, Though her hair is appearing there, it's not, to me, it's not a big issue. Uh, Her wrists are showing. It's really not a big deal to me either. Uh, but I mean, it is a little bit high there, but it's not. To be honest, it's really. This is even better than the last outfit, the one I just showed you. So yeah, I approve of this. It's even more loose than the other ladies, who was a little bit tight around the waist. And if she was more voluptuous, then yeah, you'd see more. But uh, I can tell she's a woman. It's feminine, so I definitely approve of this outfit. Okay, so uh, that's not the point of this video, but anyway, moving on. Once I get Genesis 38. Okay, so resuming. So, what does it mean to ornament one's face? Well, I just showed you some pictures, or the picture, the first one. And it said that she sat by the gates of Enna. Uh, but in the Masoretic, in verse 14, it says that she wrapped herself. She didn't ornament her face in the Masoretic. She wrapped herself and sat in an open place. So, how would anyone be attracted to her if she just covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself? That sounds more like the garments of a widow, whereas here, she's trying to attract men. She's trying to attract specifically her father in law. And so we see in verse 16 that Judah notices her, and he thinks she's a prostitute, a harlot, a whore. And it says in the Septuagint, he went out of his way to her. So he didn't just, it's not like she ran into him and impeded his way. He went to look for her. It's like, hey, I remember her. Let's go look and see if she's still there, kind of thing. In the Masoretic, it says he turned unto her by the way. So showing that, yeah, he went to her, but it's more telling in the Septuagint that he really did make the effort to look for her. Okay, let's make no bones about it. He wanted to do her. He wanted to have sex with her. Verse 18, uh, well, he talks to her, what will you give me? Uh, he's asking her, let me do it with you. And she asks, what were you going to give me? And verse 17, uh, he says, I'll give you a goat, but in the meantime, let me give you a pledge or an earnest. It's worded here, an earnest, which is pretty much a pledge, I'd say. And she said, give me your ring. So she's coming up with the terms. I want your ring, your bracelet, and the staff. And he gave them to her, and he did her. And it says that she had a baby pretty much very quickly. Uh, or maybe, the sperm met the egg pretty quick. So that's probably what it meant. First is the Masoretic, which says your signet, which is a ring, and your bracelet, so more than one bracelet, and the staff, your staff. Okay, I wanted to make a note here that men in ancient times, or in this time specifically, they wore jewelry as a sign of wealth and status, even then, even back then. Verse 21, he asked, where is the harlot who was in Anan by the wayside? Versus, where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? Okay, I don't think she was openly by the wayside, because if she was openly there, he wouldn't have to go out of his way to her. He wouldn't have to search for her in a way. She'd be more hidden. But she planned it in a way that he would be the one to meet her, not any other man. So I have a feeling it wasn't so open. It was more, although she was public, but maybe she was not as open as one would think, that she's just there, in front of everybody. Is more, she placed herself in a way that he would run into her. So anyway, because it says that he went out of his way to go to her. Uh, that's just my interpretation. Could be wrong, could be right. So let's see, verse 23. says, let us not be ridiculed. I sent this kid, but you have not found her. So don't let us be ridiculed or a joke. Versus, unless we be shamed. So very different, but anyhow, they're both not good. Verse 26 says, Tamar, this is the father, Judah, father-in-law, saying, Tamar is cleared after he realized that it was his ring, his bracelet, his staff, and he actually had sex with his daughter-in-law and didn't realize it. I don't know, I guess when they're doing it, they keep the veil on because he didn't recognize her. Either that or they just turn the lights off, similar to Jacob and Rachel and Leah, where he didn't know it was Leah. I thought it was Rachel. So maybe that's just a custom back then that they don't really see what they're doing or see who they're doing it with. They don't look at the face. They just, you know, conceal the face, I guess. So in verse 26, Tamar is cleared. It says, Tamar is cleared rather than I. So she's not guilty, essentially. And he knew her not again, meaning he didn't have sex with her ever again after that incident. And then in verse 20, part, I apologize for the background noise. That's something I can't control at this moment. Tamar, in verse 26 of the Masoretic, it says, she has been more righteous than I. So a very similar train of thought, however, it just says she's cleared rather than, guilty, for example. And he knew her again no more. So expressing the same behavior that he didn't have sex with her ever again. Verse 29 is the last verse that has a difference. And it says here, this is after Tamar gave birth to the twins. And it says here, why has the barrier been cut through because of you? Talking to the hand, talking to regarding the baby. So I believe this is the midwife said, this one shall come out first. It's either the midwife or Tamar, but it's hard to say. But why has the barrier been cut through because of you? Okay, that's how she describes this son named Phares, which the name means to break through, to breach. And the Masoretic says, how, not why, how have you broken forth? Breach upon you. This breach be upon you. Okay, I'm not sure what that means, but in the Septuagint, it's pretty clear. Why has the barrier been cut through? Because of you. That makes more sense. Rather than how have you broken forth? Well, babies, they come out. I mean, how? It's childbirth. This breach be upon you? What breach? Okay, again, it's confusing. But here it says, why has the barrier been cut through because of you? Why has the amniotic sac or whatever, giving birth, why have you come out because of you? How has the breach of childbirth been broken through because of you? Because look, you have the first son coming out, but then he withdrew his hand, and then the brother came out, but he's the one who breaks through first. So why have you been the one to come through first, basically? Instead of how have you broken forth, this breach be upon you, doesn't make any sense. So that's all I have to say about this chapter. Again, I know my views can be interpreted as extreme in a way, in a sense. However, if you go back to biblical culture, that's the way biblical culture was. I'm not trying to put my own interpretation on it. It's just the way women dressed. You can look at photos or depictions and paintings of women uh, back then. Let me just take another one, for example. Okay, so I do realize this is a picture of a nun holding a basket of food, but you look at cultures such as Japan, the Orient, you look at the Middle East, women wore layers. They wore many layers and they were loose and flowing. Typically, they would wear head coverings as well, something to conceal their beauty. They would only reveal it at certain times and they would be very modest about it. Uh, they're not trying to send men to hell, basically, or entice them from their looks. And you can see, yeah, there are many women who wear head coverings. In some cases, they did reveal cleavage, but I believe that was more prostitutes, in my opinion. But the normal, everyday woman would not dress like that. Your average woman would probably dress something like this. They'd wear many layers. They would cover up their cleavage. They wouldn't show very much skin, if any skin at all. And they would cover up their ankles. Again, this is medieval times, uh, medieval and Renaissance period. Look at the Queen, okay? Here's a picture of the Queen. And you can see Queen Elizabeth. She isn't showing any skin except for her face and hands. She's got something of a head covering going on. That's a crown. I understand. Um, but for the most part, fashion has definitely, taken a turn for the worse since I'd say maybe the 50s, 60s. It wasn't really that long ago where women were dressing very, very conservatively. And this is just, so these are, again, this is a dress inspired by those times. You can see it's very conservative. Yeah, she's showing a little bit of shoulder and a little too much neck. But anyhow, I'm just trying to make the point that, you know, uh, fashion has definitely devolved instead of evolving. It's only made it more difficult for men to remain pure in their minds. Um, okay, you know what? I don't know where I'm going right now. I feel like, I don't know, it says the P word there, but anyway, I'm just trying to prove a point that fashion nowadays has been so corrupted and there's so many hypersexualized images. Um, okay, let's look at this one, for example. Okay, no, that's, I think that's way too extreme, but anyhow. Uh, but yes, layers, loose, so you wouldn't see their form, you wouldn't see the female form too much, especially the breasts, you wouldn't see their buttocks, even the form of it. Obviously, skirts are going to be big and outflowing. You wouldn't see cleavage. Ideally, you shouldn't. But I find the Europeans tend to be more lax. They're a little more lax in terms of their values, in terms of modesty. The Europeans are. That's just part of their culture. I guess uh, they're not as modest as other cultures, I suppose. But anyhow, but at one point, yes, very modest here. But this is more what I'm talking about. So biblical kind of fashion would be for women very modest. I'd say this is very modest, except for maybe the last two there. We're showing too much neck and maybe a bit there. But anyway, the women would want to be covered up, okay, to conceal, uh, not conceal, but to be respectable. Yeah. Uh, okay. You know what? I misspoke. So this is European fashion back then. It's just when you think about European fashion today, it's such a far cry from what it used to be. So that's why I say that. I'm sure there are women all over the world and in different cultures that dress very uh, in a revealing way. However, the Middle East and those in Asian countries tend to dress a little more conservatively, I've noticed. Uh, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And obviously, you have those who are in tribes in parts like Africa, Aboriginal people, Native people, and it is hot there. However, they tend to be naked or very scant clothing. So completely the opposite. And they've been doing that for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Maybe it's because of the weather. I don't know, but I, I'm not going to lie and say that it's modest because it's very immodest. But that's their culture. I respect that, but that's not, obviously, I don't prefer that. That's just leading to lack of self-control, and you're going to drive the men crazy over there. So that's all I have to say about that is Genesis 38. Thank you for your time. Jehovah bless you and make your way prosperous. Until next time, this is Jack Knight signing off for Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Shalom.